What if the calmest cowboy on television carried a private blacklist for 20 years? What if the man who kept a frontier town orderly on screen was surrounded by tensions powerful enough to collapse an entire television empire overnight? He did not simply play a lawman. He was pushed to embody an America that demanded one kind of masculinity, one kind of whiteness, one kind of silence. And he carried that burden on a body already broken by war, a World War II wound, a bullet never removed, and pain that never truly faded. He never wanted to become anyone's political monument. Yet the industry built monuments out of men, then punished them with prejudice and panic, where one rumor, one photograph, or one wrong association could turn a legend into ashes. So he learned to rule through restraint, control, and distance rather than noise or force. Over 2 decades, 8 figures became 8 pressure points. Some arrived as benefactors, others as rivals, collaborators, or symbols of change. Not all were enemies. Some were mirrors reflecting fears he refused to name. Each one threatened his image, his authority, and the carefully protected myths of a brutal era. The truth remains. The first name on the list was John Wayne, and the conflict began with a character who would define an entire generation of television. Matt Dillon was the central figure of Gunsmoke, the Marshal of Dodge City, the moral authority of the American frontier, and the man audiences were taught to trust without question. To play him was not just to act, it was to represent order, masculinity, and American values week after week. The actor chosen to carry that weight was James Arness, and that choice did not happen by accident. John Wayne personally recommended him. In Hollywood of the 1,950 seconds, Wayne was more than a star, he was an institution. His endorsement opened doors no audition ever could. But it also came with an invisible contract. Wayne believed masculinity had a single correct shape, loud, dominant, unapologetically conservative, and rooted in white authority. He expected the man playing Matt Dillon to extend that ideology beyond the screen. Political appearances were encouraged. Conservative events were suggested. Wayne pushed Arness to be tougher, more aggressive, more openly ideological, both in public and in how Dillon handled violence on screen. Arness refused, not with speeches, not with confrontations. He refused by doing nothing. Invitations were declined, rallies were skipped. Requests to harden Dillon into a symbol of domination were met with restraint. That silence enraged Wayne far more than open rebellion ever could. Behind closed doors, Wayne reduced Arness to a single word: soft. It was meant as an insult, but soft did not mean weak. It meant Arness would not hate on command. It meant he would not turn Matt Dillon into a political weapon. It meant he saw the Marshal not as a symbol of racial or ideological supremacy, but as a man whose authority came from judgment, not cruelty. The tension reached the scripts themselves. Wayne advised early Gunsmoke scenes and demanded more brutality in arrests, more domination, less restraint. Arness responded calmly and drew a line that Wayne immediately understood. He said he did not want Matt Dillon to become anyone's copy. That sentence ended the illusion of mentorship. From that moment, the relationship cooled. Wayne stopped praising Arness publicly. Conversations became distant. There were no public feuds, only a permanent fracture. Wayne believed he had created a successor who would carry his worldview forward. Arness rejected the mold entirely. Was silence cowardice? Or was it the only resistance available in an industry that crushed dissent? When power lifts you into the spotlight, does it own you forever? John Wayne remained at the top of Arness's blacklist, not out of hatred, but because he was the first man to teach him a brutal lesson. Playing Matt Dillon meant holding immense power, and refusing to let that power be used by anyone else came with a lifelong cost. The second name on the list was Rock Hudson, and the reason for the tension had nothing to do with personal conflict. Hudson was not a rival, not a co-star, and not even someone he ever argued with. Yet his presence triggered a fear that Hollywood, in the 1,950 seconds, considered lethal. At the height of his fame, Rock Hudson was the ultimate romantic idol, handsome, masculine, and adored by millions of women. What the public did not know, and what the studios were desperate to hide, was that Hudson was gay. In that era, Hollywood treated homosexuality not as an identity, but as a scandal capable of destroying anyone caught too close to it. Executives genuinely believed reputation could be contaminated through association, photographs, or even shared laughter. For James Arness, this fear was amplified by his role on Gunsmoke. He was being built as the embodiment of upright, no-nonsense masculinity. One misplaced image could undermine that entire construction. The danger was not Hudson himself, but what Hollywood might project onto the man standing beside him. That anxiety surfaced during network events. Seating charts placed the two men next to each other, and the reaction was immediate. Arness requested a change. When questioned, his response was short and defensive. He did not want people getting the wrong idea about him. It was not cruelty or hatred. It was survival in an industry that punished suspicion more harshly than truth. The network responded with precision. Photo shoots were rearranged. Award ceremonies were resequenced. Television appearances were adjusted so the two men would never share a frame. The goal was simple: containment. Protect the image at all costs. Was this prejudice or panic? Was Arness rejecting Hudson as a person or fleeing the narrative Hollywood threatened to impose on him? He never spoke publicly against anyone. He never attacked. He withdrew. And that withdrawal hardened into distance. The irony is brutal. Hudson had done nothing wrong. Yet he became a symbol of risk, a silent danger zone around which careers were carefully navigated. Hollywood erased proximity, preserved myth, and moved on. So what was truly feared, one man's identity, or the collapse of an illusion built on silence? And when fear governs behavior long enough, does it eventually become indistinguishable from resentment? He third name cut deeper than all the others because it was personal. Amanda Blake was not a rival from outside the show. She was the woman audiences believed belonged beside the lawman every week. On Gunsmoke, she played Miss Kitty Russell, the saloon owner of Dodge City and the emotional counterweight to Matt Dillon. To the public, their relationship was romantic destiny. To the network, it was ratings gold. Letters poured in by the thousands asking for kisses, confessions, and a wedding that never came. CBS leaned into the fantasy, pushing Kitty forward in publicity, posters, and scripts. That was where the real conflict began. James Arness believed Gunsmoke needed one fixed center. Matt Dillon was that center. Everyone else, in his view, orbited around him. Amanda Blake did not agree. She wanted Miss Kitty to be more than a prop behind the bar. She pushed for deeper writing, emotional agency, and storylines where Kitty stood on her own rather than waiting for Dillon's approval. As the years passed, the tension became impossible to ignore. Crew members learned not to place themselves between the two during rehearsals. Script discussions grew quiet and uncomfortable. Nothing exploded until 1973. During rehearsal for the episode The Badge, Blake finally confronted Arness directly. After years of restraint, she accused him of making Kitty invisible. The room froze. According to multiple witnesses, Arness did not raise his voice. He answered coldly, saying that she was turning the character into too much of a real person. That sentence ended everything. From that moment on, their working relationship became strictly mechanical. Shooting schedules were adjusted to minimize shared scenes. Off camera, they did not speak. They avoided eye contact. Public appearances together were reduced to the bare minimum required by the network. The warmth audiences saw on screen was performance, nothing more. Blake later described her time on the show as a 20-year prison. Arness called it professional obligation. When she decided to leave Gunsmoke after 2 decades, CBS begged her to stay. Fans protested. Arness said nothing. There were no farewells, no attempts at reconciliation. When Amanda Blake died in 1989, Arness did not attend the memorial. He sent a brief note acknowledging her importance to the show. To those who knew the history, the message was chilling in its distance. The wound had never healed. Why did this conflict hurt more than the others? Because it was not about politics, image, or fear of scandal. It was about control, about who owned the emotional heart of Gunsmoke, about whether Matt Dillon could exist without being challenged by the woman standing closest to him. For 20 years, America watched a love story. Behind the camera, two people endured a quiet war that neither side ever won. The fourth name on the list surprised many because it had nothing to do with Westerns. Sammy Davis Jr. was not a Gunsmoke actor, not a rival, and not someone competing for screen time. Yet, his existence represented a threat to everything the show quietly depended on. By the early 1960 seconds, Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most famous black entertainers in America, a singer, dancer, actor, and member of the Rat Pack. He was bold, visible, and impossible to ignore, and that visibility made him dangerous to a television Western built on an unspoken rule: Dodge City was white. Gunsmoke presented a carefully sealed version of the American frontier. Week after week, it showed law, order, and morality without confronting race. Black characters were absent. Black stories did not exist. The myth depended on exclusion, even if it was never said aloud. That silence was challenged in 1964 when civil rights supporters and media voices began floating an idea that terrified CBS executives: a guest appearance by Sammy Davis Jr. on Gunsmoke. On paper, it was a ratings miracle. To others, it was a symbolic crack in the wall of television segregation. Inside the room, the reaction was immediate and tense. According to writers who were present, James Arness listened quietly before delivering a single line that ended the discussion: "Dodge City has no place for a song and dance man." The subtext was clear: Dodge City had no place for a black man. Arness did not attack Davis personally. He never spoke ill of him publicly, but he understood the stakes. One image of Matt Dillon standing beside the most famous black star in America could turn him into a political symbol overnight. It would drag the show into a racial battle it had avoided for nearly a decade. Arness hated that prospect. From that point forward, distance became policy. Award shows where Davis performed were avoided. Public events were navigated carefully. Promotional opportunities that might place them together were quietly declined. CBS understood the message without it being spoken aloud. When Davis heard the rumor that he had been turned away, his response was calm. He reportedly smiled and said they were not ready yet. That quiet dignity only underscored the reality. The problem was never talent, it was fear. What Arness resented was not the man, but what the man exposed. Davis was living proof that the world was changing, and Gunsmoke was not. Standing beside him would have forced the show to acknowledge a truth it had spent years erasing. So the line remained uncrossed. The myth stayed intact. And another name was added to the list, not out of hatred, but out of refusal to let reality interrupt a carefully protected illusion. The fifth name on the list was Lee Marvin, and the tension had nothing to do with personal insults or direct rivalry. It came from contrast. Marvin represented a kind of masculinity that felt dangerous to the order being carefully protected. By the late 1950 seconds and early 1960 seconds, Marvin was rising fast. Scarred, rough-voiced, unpredictable, he played killers, anti-heroes, and men who laughed at violence rather than restrained it. His screen presence was explosive. He drank hard, fought harder, and cultivated an image that rejected polish and control. Audiences were drawn to the chaos. Standing opposite that image was James Arness, whose authority on Gunsmoke depended on discipline. His lawman was calm, upright, and governed by judgment. Masculinity, in that world, meant order. The two men did not need to argue to become opposites. Their mere existence in the same cultural moment created friction. Marvin's rise suggested that audiences were beginning to favor violence over restraint, rebellion over rules. To Arness, that shift felt like a threat not just to his image, but to the moral center of the genre he anchored. When asked by reporters about Marvin as a new symbol of masculinity, Arness smiled politely. In private, his view was harsher. He reportedly described Marvin as a time bomb, saying that chaos was being mistaken for strength. Marvin, for his part, dismissed the clean-cut television cowboy, joking that he preferred real cowboys to men who looked like they had stepped out of a rulebook. Those comments circulated quietly. No public feud followed, but the distance hardened. When CBS considered bringing Marvin back for a special Gunsmoke appearance to boost ratings, the objection came swiftly. His style, Arness said, did not fit the spirit of the show. Everyone understood the deeper meaning. Allowing Marvin into that world risked turning Matt Dillon into something outdated, a relic of restraint in an era hungry for brutality. Arness did not hate Marvin's success. He feared what that success symbolized. Two visions of manhood were colliding, and only one could dominate the screen. So collaboration never happened. The lines stayed drawn. And another name settled into the list, marking the moment when masculinity itself became a battlefield. The sixth name on the list was Bert Reynolds, and this time the threat was unmistakable. It was not ideological. It was not about scandal or public image. It was time itself. Reynolds represented the future arriving early, confident, and impossible to ignore. Reynolds joined Gunsmoke in 1962 as a young blacksmith turned gunslinger. From his first appearance, the energy on set shifted. He was younger, sharper, openly charismatic, and effortlessly magnetic on camera. Viewers noticed. The press noticed. Most importantly, the network noticed. CBS quickly understood what they had. Female audiences responded strongly. Photographers centered him in publicity shots. Scripts began giving him more dialogue and action. For a series that had revolved around one immovable center for years, the balance began to tilt. And James Arness felt it immediately. This was not a clash of personalities. Reynolds was not aggressive or disrespectful. The tension came from perception. In Hollywood, visibility equals power. Every extra line, every close-up, every magazine mention signaled a future where the spotlight might shift. Arness objected quietly but consistently. More scenes for Reynolds were questioned. Poster placement was challenged. The resistance was subtle, but constant. The breaking point came during a magazine interview. When asked whether he might one day replace the star of the show, Reynolds smiled and replied that he did not plan to stand behind anyone forever. The comment was casual, almost playful, but on set, it landed like a declaration. That night, according to crew members, Arness did not explode. He paced alone, visibly unsettled. The fear was not of Reynolds as a person, but of what he represented. The undeniable truth that every reign ends. Gunsmoke could not sustain two centers for long. Soon after, Reynolds made his own decision. He approached the producers and admitted that the show was not his future. He did not want to live under another man's shadow, just as that man did not want to share it. When Reynolds left to pursue films, Arness offered no farewell, no handshake, no public blessing. Privately, he said only one line: "The balance is back." Reynolds went on to become one of the biggest movie stars in America. When asked later about Arness, he spoke carefully, saying there are places where only one man can stand. It was not bitterness, it was recognition. This conflict cut deep because it required no hatred. It was the quiet terror of replacement, and in that moment, the blacklist recorded not an enemy, but a warning time spares no one, not even legends. The seventh name on the list was Charles Markey Warren, the first creative force who dared to challenge where power truly lived on Gunsmoke. Warren was not a star. He was a director and writer, one of the architects of the show's earliest vision, and that was precisely the problem. Warren believed Gunsmoke should be an ensemble drama, not a monument to a single man. In his view, Dodge City mattered as much as its marshal. Kitty, Doc, Chester, and the townspeople were not satellites. They were the story. This philosophy clashed directly with James Arness, who believed a Western survived only if one figure anchored its moral authority. The conflict surfaced quietly at first. Warren began expanding dialogue for supporting characters, especially Miss Kitty Russell. He wrote scenes where Kitty challenged the marshal, forced him into doubt, and occasionally won. To Warren, this made the show richer. To Arness, it diluted the center. The breaking point came during a script rewrite. In the original scene, the marshal bursts into the saloon and rescues Kitty from a group of drunk cowboys, a classic image of dominance. Warren cut it. In his version, Kitty saves herself before the marshal even enters. The message was clear. Strength did not always need to arrive with a badge. Arness reacted immediately. According to crew members, he slammed the script down and accused Warren of taking the focus away from the story. Warren did not back down. He replied that he was returning the focus to where it belonged. The room froze. Arness walked out without another word. After that meeting, the outcome was inevitable. Warren did not last long on the show. No official demand was ever recorded, but Hollywood understood how power worked in a long-running television series. The face on screen carried more authority than the voice behind the camera. CBS made its choice. When Warren packed his office, he reportedly left behind a sentence that circulated quietly for years. The show belonged to one man, and anyone who challenged that would eventually be pushed out. Scripts soon shifted. Supporting arcs were reduced. The center tightened again. This conflict mattered because it revealed the structure beneath the legend. Gunsmoke was not just a show, it was a kingdom. And kingdoms do not tolerate divided rule. Warren challenged the throne and lost not because he was wrong, but because he was early. The eighth and final name on the list was Clint Walker, and this case was different from all the others. There was no argument, no ideological clash, no rivalry spoken aloud. The tension existed before a single word was exchanged. For years, James Arness had been the tallest, most imposing cowboy on television. At 6 feet 6 inches, his physical presence was inseparable from his authority. Height was not just a trait, it was part of the myth. Standing above others reinforced the idea that Matt Dillon was the unquestioned center of the Western universe. Then Clint Walker appeared. When Cheyenne premiered in 1955, Walker instantly became a sensation. He was taller, broader, and more physically commanding than anyone on television. His body looked carved from stone. The camera loved him. Audiences loved him. And Hollywood took notice. Walker did nothing to provoke tension. He did not compete for roles. He did not seek attention. He simply existed. And that existence was enough to unsettle the carefully protected hierarchy of television westerns. The unease reached its peak in 1960, when CBS executives floated an idea that terrified Arness, a crossover episode between Gunsmoke and Cheyenne. To the network, it was a ratings goldmine, two giants of television westerns sharing the screen. To Arness, it was a nightmare. If Walker stepped into Dodge City, even for a single episode, Matt Dillon would no longer be the tallest man in the frame. The visual language of authority would break. Viewers might ask a forbidden question. Who is really the #1 TV cowboy? According to producers, Arness did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He sat in silence before delivering one cold sentence. Gunsmoke does not need another giant. The message was unmistakable. The crossover died that day. From then on, every question about a possible Walker appearance was deflected. Schedules did not align. Styles did not match. The story did not require it. But inside CBS, a quiet understanding circulated. No one made James Arness take a step back except Clint Walker. This conflict mattered because it stripped everything down to its core. There were no politics, no scandals, no scripts to fight over. There was only presence. Walker did not threaten Arness with words or ambition. He threatened him by revealing that power can disappear the moment someone bigger walks into the room. In the end, the final name on the blacklist was not an enemy. It was a reflection, a reminder that myths depend on comparison and that sometimes the most dangerous challenge is simply standing there. By the end of his career, James Arness rarely looked back. He avoided rewatching Gunsmoke, not because it failed, but because it reminded him of a life spent holding everything together. For 20 years, the show was not just a job. It was a prison built from silence, restraint, and constant vigilance. He kept the crown, but the cost was distance from colleagues, from conflict, and from himself. The 8 names on that invisible list were never simply enemies. They were pressure points. Each one exposed a fear, losing control, losing relevance, losing the image that made him untouchable. Hollywood rewarded that control, but it never rewarded peace. What survived was a legend. What faded was freedom. So the question remains open. Did these conflicts make Gunsmoke stronger, more disciplined, more iconic, or did they strip away the possibility of something richer, more human, and more honest? Was the price of absolute authority worth paying? Now, we want to hear from you. Which conflict do you believe weighed most heavily on James Arness's life and career? Which moment changed him forever? And if you were in his place, would you have protected the throne or walked away to reclaim yourself? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Like, subscribe, and join us as we continue uncovering the stories Hollywood never wanted told.